I'm Captain Michaela Rockford, 29, and I clawed my way from a childhood where feelings were mocked to earning my place in the U.S. Army. For years, I showed up for my family, sending money, covering for them, and trying to make them proud. But when my own brother laughed at my PTSD and my mother called me pathetic at the dinner table, I made a choice that changed everything. Have you ever been humiliated by the very people you sacrificed everything for? If so, tell me in the comments, you're not alone. Before I dive into what happened, let me know where you're watching from. And if you've ever had to stand up for yourself after being written off, hit that like button and subscribe for more true stories about setting boundaries and reclaiming your worth. What happened next might surprise you. I grew up in a house where crying meant weakness. My father, before he passed, used to say feelings were for people who couldn't handle reality. My mother carried that forward like a torch she'd been trusted to keep lit. My brother Mark learned it too, maybe better than any of us. Toughness wasn't just valued in the Rockford household, it was currency. And I spent my childhood trying to earn it. I was 12 when Mark, already in his 20s, told me I threw a ball like I was afraid of it. I was 14 when my mother said I needed to stop being so sensitive about everything. By 16, I'd learned to swallow whatever hurt and walk it off. They didn't mean to be cruel, I told myself. They were just preparing me for a world that wouldn't coddle me either. When I told them I was enlisting in the Army, my mother's first response was to ask if I was sure I could handle it. Mark laughed and said at least they'd toughen me up. My father had served, briefly, in a non-combat role, and the military had always been spoken of with a certain reverence in our house. But that reverence didn't extend to believing I belonged there. I was their daughter, their little sister, the one who used to be afraid of thunderstorms. I joined anyway. I needed structure. I needed purpose. And maybe, somewhere deep down, I needed to prove that I wasn't the fragile thing they thought I was. Basic training was brutal, but I made it through. I excelled, actually. I found that I could endure more than I'd ever imagined. The discipline gave me something to hold on to, and the sense of service filled a space I hadn't known was empty. My first deployment came when I was 23. Before I left, there was a small family dinner. My mother seemed proud in her restrained way. She touched my shoulder and told me to be safe. Mark gave me an awkward half-hug and said, "Don't get soft on us over there." He meant it as encouragement, I think. Their version of it. I wrote letters home during that first tour. Not many, things were busy, and the internet was unreliable, but I wrote. I told them I was doing well. I left out the parts about the heat, the fear, the way mortars sounded when they were too close. I left out the night our convoy got hit, and I watched my sergeant drag a wounded soldier to cover while gunfire tore up the ground around them. I told them I was proud to serve. I told them I missed them. My mother wrote back occasionally. She talked about the weather, about Mark's new job, about a neighbor who'd asked about me. She signed off with "Stay strong." Mark never wrote, but I didn't expect him to. He wasn't the writing type. When my father's medical bills started piling up during my second deployment, I sent money home. I didn't have much, but I sent what I could. My mother thanked me in a voicemail, her voice tight with something that might have been gratitude or just exhaustion. When he passed 3 months later, I couldn't get leave in time for the funeral. I called from a satellite phone in the middle of the night, their mourning, and my mother said it was fine, that I was doing important work, that he would have understood. I told myself she meant it. I told myself they appreciated the sacrifice. I came home after that deployment different. Not visibly, maybe, but different. I'd seen things I couldn't unsee, done things I couldn't undo. I had trouble sleeping. Loud noises made me flinch. I'd catch myself scanning rooms for exits, for threats, for anything out of place. I knew what it was. We'd had enough briefings about PTSD, about hypervigilance, about the signs. But knowing didn't make it easier. That first dinner back, my mother made pot roast. Mark came over with his girlfriend, a quiet woman named Ashley who smiled politely and didn't ask questions. We sat around the same table where we'd eaten 1,000 meals before, and for a moment, it felt normal. Then a car backfired outside. I dropped my fork, my whole body tensing, my hand instinctively moving to my side where my weapon would have been. Mark laughed. Not meanly, exactly. Just a short bark of amusement. Still jumpy, huh? I picked up my fork, forced my breathing to steady. Reflex. You've been home for 3 days, he said, still grinning. Might want to work on that. My mother looked at me over her glasses. You'll adjust. Just takes time. I nodded. I wanted to explain that it wasn't something you just adjusted away, that my nervous system had been rewired by months of constant threat, that the sounds of home didn't match the sounds my brain was calibrated to interpret. But I didn't. They wouldn't have understood, and I didn't want to sound like I was complaining. The nightmares started that week. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, my heart hammering, the sheets tangled around my legs like I'd been fighting them. I'd see faces, soldiers I'd served with, people we'd tried to help, the ones we couldn't save. I'd hear the screaming, the explosions, the terrible silence that came after. I tried to be quiet about it. I was staying in my old room at my mother's house until I figured out my next steps, and I didn't want to wake her. But one night, I must have cried out, because she knocked on my door at 3 a.m. Are you all right? She asked through the door. I'm fine, I said. Just a bad dream. There was a pause. You should see someone about that. I will. Good night, then. I heard her footsteps retreat down the hallway. I sat in the dark, my knees pulled to my chest, and wondered if she'd had bad dreams after my father died. If she had, she'd never mention them. In our family, you handled your problems privately, quietly, and you certainly didn't make them anyone else's burden. The VA offered counseling, and I went. It helped some. The therapist was a veteran herself, and she didn't make me feel broken. She made me feel like what I was experiencing was a natural response to unnatural circumstances. But the nightmares continued. The hypervigilance continued. I was managing, but I wasn't healed. Mark noticed. Or rather, he noticed that I wasn't back to whatever version of normal he expected. You're still doing the therapy thing, he asked one afternoon when he stopped by. Yeah. How long are you going to need that? I don't know. As long as it takes. He shrugged. Just seems like you'd be over it by now. Over it. Like it was a cold. Like it was something that ran its course and left you immune. I didn't have the energy to explain, so I didn't. I just nodded and changed the subject. My mother was more subtle, but the message was the same. She'd mention women she knew who'd been through hard times, a divorce, a job loss, and how they'd just moved on without making a fuss. The implication was clear. I should be stronger. I should be past this. I started looking for my own place. I needed space, needed to not feel like my struggles were an inconvenience to people who were supposed to care about me. I found a small apartment across town and moved in with help from a friend I'd made at the VA, another veteran, a guy named Daniel Reyes who'd been an army sergeant before an IED took part of his leg. He understood what I was going through in a way my family never would. They don't get it, he said as we carried boxes up the stairs. Most people don't. They think trauma is something you can just decide to get over. Yeah, it's not your job to make them understand, he added. Your job is to take care of yourself. I thought about that a lot in the weeks that followed. I'd spent so much of my life trying to be what my family wanted, tough, uncomplaining, self-sufficient. I'd sent them money when they needed it. I'd shown up for dinners and holidays even when it hurt. I'd tried to be the daughter and sister they could be proud of. And in return, they'd made it clear that my pain was an embarrassment. That my trauma was something I should hide. But I kept showing up. Because they were my family, and because some part of me still hoped they'd eventually see me, really see me, and understand what I'd been through. What I was still going through. I should have known better. The mockery started slowly. Small comments that I told myself weren't meant to hurt. Mark would see me flinch at a sudden noise and shake his head with a smirk. My mother would sigh when I mentioned therapy, like I'd brought up something tedious and unnecessary. At family gatherings, my service came up less and less, and when it did, it was always with a strange dismissiveness. How's the soldier doing? My uncle asked at Thanksgiving, and there was something almost sarcastic in his tone. I'm doing well, I said. Still having those dreams? Mark asked from across the table. I felt everyone's eyes on me. Sometimes. Huh. He took a drink of his beer. Thought that would have cleared up by now. My mother jumped in, her voice bright and false. She's working on it. Aren't you, Michaela? I nodded. I didn't trust myself to say more. The conversation moved on, but I felt the shift. My PTSD had become a topic of casual conversation, something they could reference and dismiss in the same breath. It wasn't treated with the gravity it deserved, it was treated like a character flaw, a quirk I should have outgrown. I started declining invitations. I told myself I was busy, that I had plans, that I just needed some time to myself. The truth was I couldn't stand the way they looked at me anymore. Like I was damaged goods. Like I was less than I'd been before. Daniel noticed I was pulling back. "You don't have to keep subjecting yourself to that," he said one evening over coffee. "They're my family." And? Family doesn't give you a free pass to be cruel. I wanted to argue, but I couldn't. He was right. They were being cruel, even if they didn't think of it that way. Their jokes, their dismissiveness, their complete inability to acknowledge what I'd sacrificed, it all added up to a profound lack of respect. Still, I tried. I showed up for my mother's birthday. I answered Mark's texts, even when they were laced with sarcasm. I sent Christmas gifts. I kept the door open, hoping they'd eventually walk through it with something resembling empathy. Then my mother called. She wanted me to come to dinner the following weekend. Mark would be there, along with his girlfriend and a few of my aunts and uncles. It was meant to be a casual family gathering, nothing special. I almost said no, but I didn't. I told her I'd be there. I regretted it before I even walked through the door. The house smelled like roasted chicken and garlic. My mother greeted me with a brief hug, the kind that felt obligatory. Mark was already in the living room, beer in hand, talking loudly about something that had happened at his job. His girlfriend, Ashley, gave me a small wave. My Aunt Carol and Uncle Jim were there too, along with my cousin Rachel. It was a full house. Dinner was fine at first. We talked about work, about the weather, about nothing of consequence. I stayed quiet, mostly, eating my food and nodding at the appropriate moments. I'd learned that participating too much only opened me up to scrutiny. Then Mark brought it up. "So, Michaela," he said, his tone casual but pointed. "You still seeing that therapist?" I set down my fork. "Yeah. How long has it been now?" 2 years. "About that." He whistled low. "That's a long time to still be dealing with, what do they call it? PTSD?" The table went quiet. I felt everyone's attention shift to me, curious and uncomfortable in equal measure. "It's a process," I said evenly. "A process," he repeated, like he was tasting the words. "Sounds like an excuse to me." "Mark," my mother said, but there was no real reproach in her voice. He leaned back in his chair, grinning now. "I mean, come on. You still get nightmares? Still jumping at loud noises? That's pathetic." The word landed like a slap. Pathetic. I felt my face flush, my chest tighten. I looked at my mother, waiting for her to say something, to defend me. Instead, she laughed. A short, sharp sound that cut deeper than Mark's words. "She can't handle real life," she said, shaking her head like I was a disappointment she'd learned to live with. A few people chuckled. My Uncle Jim looked uncomfortable, but he didn't say anything. My Aunt Carol glanced away. Rachel stared at her plate. I stood up. My chair scraped against the floor, loud in the sudden silence. "Where are you going?" my mother asked. "I'm leaving." "Oh, don't be so sensitive," Mark said. "We're just joking." I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw nothing but contempt. I looked at my mother and saw the same. They didn't see me. They saw a burden, an inconvenience, a punchline. I grabbed my jacket and walked out. No one followed me. I sat in my car for a long time, my hands gripping the steering wheel, my breath coming in short, shallow gasps. I'd given them everything. My loyalty, my love, my money when they needed it. I'd served my country, put my life on the line, come home broken in ways they couldn't see. And they'd called me pathetic. They'd laughed. I drove home in a haze, my mind replaying the scene over and over. Mark's sneer. My mother's laugh. The silence from everyone else. I'd been humiliated in front of my entire family, and not one of them had stood up for me. When I got home, I sat in the dark and let myself cry. Not because I was weak, but because I'd finally accepted the truth: they would never respect me. They would never understand. And I needed to stop hoping they would. That night, alone in my apartment, I stared at the ceiling and thought about the deployment that had changed me. The one that had given me the nightmares, the hypervigilance, the scars they couldn't see. It was my third tour. I'd been promoted to captain by then, leading a small unit in a region where the threat was constant and invisible. IEDs, snipers, ambushes, every patrol was a gamble. We lost soldiers. Good people who'd never make it home. I learned to compartmentalize, to keep moving, because stopping meant thinking, and thinking meant breaking. There was one mission in particular. We'd been tasked with clearing a route for a supply convoy. Intelligence said the area was relatively secure, but intelligence was wrong more often than it was right. We moved carefully, our engineer scanning for explosives, the rest of us providing cover. Then the scanner went off. We'd found an IED, a big one, buried just off the path. While our engineer worked to disarm it, we secured the perimeter. That's when the mortars started. They came from the ridge to our east, fast and indiscriminate. The first one hit 20 meters away, close enough to knock me off my feet. I heard screaming. I saw dust and smoke and chaos. My ears were ringing, my vision blurred, but I forced myself up. 2 of my soldiers were down, both wounded. One had taken shrapnel to the leg. The other was unconscious, blood pooling beneath him. And we were still in the minefield. The mortars kept coming. I didn't think. I just moved. I grabbed the first soldier, the one with the leg wound, and dragged him back toward cover. He screamed the whole way. I left him with our medic and went back for the other one. He was heavier, deadweight, and every step felt like it might be my last. I didn't know if I was stepping on an IED. I didn't know if the next mortar would land on top of us. I just knew I couldn't leave him. I got him out. We all got out, eventually. The engineer disarmed the IED, the mortar stopped, and we made it back to base. Both soldiers survived. I was recommended for a commendation, though I never cared much about that. I cared that they made it home. But that day stayed with me. The sound of the mortars. The weight of a dying man in my arms. The certainty that I was going to die out there. It stayed with me in the nightmares, in the flashbacks, in the way my body reacted to things my family thought were nothing. And they'd called me pathetic. I called Daniel the next morning. He answered on the second ring, his voice rough with sleep. "You okay?" he asked. "No. Want to talk about it?" I told him everything. The dinner, the mockery, the way my mother had laughed. He listened without interrupting, and when I finished, he was quiet for a moment. "You know that's abuse, right?" he said finally. "They're my family. That doesn't make it okay. What they did, what they've been doing, that's not love. That's not even basic respect." I wanted to argue, but I couldn't. Because he was right. I'd been making excuses for them for years, telling myself they didn't understand, that they didn't mean it. But intent didn't matter. Impact did. And the impact of their words, their laughter, their complete dismissal of my trauma had left me feeling worthless. "What do I do?" I asked. "You set boundaries. You stop giving them access to hurt you. They'll say I'm being dramatic. Let them. You're not responsible for their reactions. You're only responsible for protecting yourself." I thought about that for days. Protecting myself. It sounded so simple, but it felt impossible. I'd spent my entire life trying to earn their approval, their respect, their love. Walking away felt like admitting defeat. But staying felt like losing myself. I started small. I stopped answering Mark's texts. When my mother called, I let it go to voicemail. I didn't make excuses or explanations. I just stopped participating in a dynamic that was destroying me. The pushback was immediate. Mark sent a string of messages, each one more incredulous than the last. "Are you seriously ignoring me? What's your problem? You're being ridiculous." My mother left a voicemail. "I don't know why you're upset, but this is childish. We're family. You need to stop being so sensitive." I deleted the messages. I deleted the voicemail. I focused on the things that made me feel whole, my therapy, my work with other veterans, the small routines that kept me grounded. Daniel checked in regularly. "How are you holding up?" "Better," I said. And I meant it. The distance hurt, but it hurt less than the constant barrage of disrespect. I didn't know then that something was about to shift. That the footage from that mission, The one where I dragged soldiers out of a minefield was about to air on national news as part of a documentary on military service. I didn't know that the narrative my family had built about me was about to collapse. I didn't know that the truth was louder than their mockery had ever been. The call came from a producer at a major news network. They were putting together a documentary on combat heroism, highlighting lesser-known stories of soldiers who'd gone above and beyond. Someone in the Army's public affairs office had flagged my name, along with the helmet cam footage from that mission. "We'd like to feature your story," the producer said. "The footage is incredible. We think it's important for people to see what soldiers like you do." I hesitated. I didn't want the attention. I didn't want to relive that day on national television. But the producer was persuasive. She talked about honoring the soldiers I'd saved, about giving the public a window into the reality of combat. She promised it would be respectful, dignified. I agreed. Not for me, but for the men I'd served with. For the ones who didn't make it home. The documentary was scheduled to air on a Wednesday evening. I didn't tell my family. I hadn't spoken to them in weeks, and I saw no reason to start now. I assumed they wouldn't watch it anyway. Military documentaries weren't their thing. I watched it alone in my apartment, Daniel on speakerphone for moral support. When the segment started, I felt my chest tighten. The footage was raw, chaotic, harder to watch than I'd expected. The camera mounted on my helmet captured everything: the explosion, the screaming, the dust and smoke. It captured me running back into the minefield, dragging one soldier, then another, my movements frantic but deliberate. The narrator's voice cut through the chaos. Captain Michaela Rockford risked her life multiple times to save her fellow soldiers, navigating an active minefield under mortar fire. Her actions that day exemplify the courage and selflessness at the heart of military service. I felt tears on my face. Not because of the praise, but because seeing it again brought everything back. The fear, the adrenaline, the certainty that I was going to die. "You okay?" Daniel asked. "Yeah," I said, my voice shaky. "I'm okay." The segment ended. My phone stayed silent for a while. Then it started buzzing. Texts, calls, messages from people I hadn't heard from in years. Fellow soldiers, friends from high school, acquaintances who'd seen the documentary. They were all congratulating me, thanking me, calling me a hero. Then my mother called. I stared at her name on the screen, my thumb hovering over the decline button. Finally, I answered. "I saw the news," she said. Her voice was strange, strained. "Okay." "I didn't know," she said. "I didn't know it was like that." I didn't respond. I didn't know what to say. "Why didn't you tell us?" she asked. Would it have mattered? The silence stretched between us. Finally, she said, "Mark wants to talk to you." "I don't want to talk to Mark." "Michaela," I hung up. My phone buzzed again. A text from Mark. "I saw the footage. Call me." I didn't. I turned my phone off and sat in the silence of my apartment, letting the weight of the day settle over me. They'd seen it. They'd seen what I'd done, what I'd survived, what had left me with the nightmares and the hypervigilance they'd mocked. And now they wanted to talk. But I didn't owe them anything. Not an explanation, not forgiveness, not another chance to hurt me. The truth had come out. Not because I'd argued or defended myself, but because it existed, undeniable and recorded. And for the first time in years, I felt something close to vindication. They'd called me pathetic. But the world had seen who I really was. The calls kept coming. My mother. Mark. Even my Aunt Carol, who'd sat silently while they humiliated me. They all wanted to talk, to explain, to somehow make it right. I ignored them for days. I focused on work, on therapy, on the messages from soldiers I'd served with. One of the men I'd pulled from the minefield sent me a long email, thanking me for saving his life, telling me about his kids and his wife and the life he'd built because I'd given him the chance. That message meant more than anything my family could have said. Daniel came over one evening with takeout. We sat on my couch, eating in comfortable silence, until he finally spoke. "You going to talk to them?" "I don't know." "You don't have to," he said. "But if you do, make sure it's on your terms." I thought about that. On my terms. I'd spent so long accommodating them, bending to their expectations, accepting their cruelty because I didn't know how to do anything else. If I talked to them now, it would be different. It would be because I chose to, not because I felt obligated. A week after the documentary aired, Mark showed up at my apartment. I saw him through the peephole, standing in the hallway, his hands shoved in his pockets. He looked uncomfortable, uncertain. I almost didn't open the door. But I did. "Hey," he said. "Hey, can I come in?" I stepped aside, and he walked past me into the living room. He looked around like he was seeing the place for the first time, even though he'd helped me move in. "I watched the news," he said, still not looking at me. "I know." I didn't. He trailed off, rubbing the back of his neck. "I didn't know it was like that." "You didn't ask." He flinched. "I'm sorry." The words hung in the air between us. I wanted to believe him, but sorry didn't erase the years of mockery, the humiliation, the way he'd made me feel small. "Why are you here, Mark?" "Because I was wrong," he said, finally meeting my eyes. I don't know what I thought. That you were exaggerating, maybe. That it couldn't have been that bad. But I saw the footage and he stopped, his voice cracking. "You could have died." "Yeah, and we treated you like." He couldn't finish the sentence. "Like I was pathetic," I said, my voice flat. He looked away. "Yeah." I waited, but he didn't say anything else. The silence stretched, heavy and uncomfortable. "I need you to understand something," I said finally. "Sorry doesn't fix this. You and Mom, you didn't just hurt me once. You hurt me over and over for years. You made me feel like my trauma was a joke, like I was weak for not being able to just get over it. And I kept showing up, kept trying to make you understand, because you're my family. But you didn't care. I care now. Because you saw the footage. Because now you have proof that I wasn't exaggerating. But Mark, I shouldn't have needed proof. You should have believed me. You should have respected me enough to take my pain seriously." He nodded slowly. "You're right. I don't know if I can forgive you," I said. "Not right now. Maybe not ever. I get that. And if I do let you back into my life, it's going to be different. I'm not going to tolerate disrespect. I'm not going to subject myself to mockery or dismissiveness. If you can't treat me with basic human decency, then we're done." "I can do that," he said. "I will." I wanted to believe him. Part of me did. But trust wasn't rebuilt with words. It was rebuilt with actions over time. "We'll see," I said. He nodded and turned to leave. At the door, he paused. "For what it's worth, I'm proud of you." I should have said that a long time ago. I didn't respond. I just watched him leave, the door clicking shut behind him. My mother called later that night. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "I saw Mark stopped by," she said. "He did. He told me what you said." "Okay. I'm sorry too, Michaela." "I am. I didn't understand." "You didn't try to understand." She was quiet for a moment. "You're right. I didn't. I thought you needed to be tougher. That coddling you would make things worse." "I didn't need coddling. I needed support. I know that now." I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to forgive her, to bridge the gap that had grown between us. But another part of me, the part that had been hurt too many times, held back. "I need time," I said. "I understand. And I need you to respect that. No guilt trips, no pressure. Just time." "Okay." We said goodbye, and I hung up. I felt exhausted, drained by the weight of it all. But I also felt something else, something that might have been relief. I'd set boundaries. I'd stood up for myself. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was in control. Daniel was right. Family didn't give you a free pass to be cruel. And respect wasn't something you owed people just because they were related to you. It was something they earned. Whether my family would earn it remained to be seen. Months passed. I kept my distance from my family, letting time and space do their work. Mark reached out occasionally, his messages careful and respectful. He asked how I was doing, shared small updates about his life, never pushed for more than I was willing to give. My mother did the same, her calls brief and measured. I didn't shut them out completely, but I didn't let them back in either. I was waiting, watching, to see if their change was real or just a temporary reaction to their guilt. In the meantime, I focused on rebuilding my life. I found purpose in working with other veterans, helping them navigate the VA system, connecting them with resources, reminding them they weren't alone. Daniel and I co-founded a small support group for combat veterans dealing with PTSD. It met every Thursday evening in the basement of a community center, and it became one of the highlights of my week. The men and women who showed up to those meetings understood me in a way my family never had. We didn't have to explain ourselves to each other. We knew the weight of service, the cost of survival, the difficulty of coming home to a world that expected us to be the same people we'd been before. One evening, a new member joined the group, a young Marine named Casey who'd only been home for a month. She sat in the back, her arms crossed, her jaw tight. I recognized that look. The defensiveness, the fear of being judged. When it was her turn to share, she said, "My family doesn't get it. They keep telling me I should be happy to be home, that I should just move on. But I can't." The room was silent except for the murmured agreements from others who'd been where she was. "You're not alone," I told her. "And you don't have to move on according to anyone else's timeline. Healing takes as long as it takes." She nodded, her eyes glistening. "Thanks." After the meeting, she approached me. "You're the captain from the news, right? The one who pulled those soldiers out of the minefield." "Yeah, that was incredible," she said. "I mean, I saw the footage, and thank you. For what you did. For what you're doing now. I'm just trying to help." "You are," she said. "More than you know." Moments like that reminded me why I kept going. Why I'd chosen to serve, why I kept showing up for people who needed it, why I refused to let my family's dismissal define me. The recognition from the documentary brought other opportunities. I was invited to speak at military events, to share my story with active duty soldiers and veterans alike. It was uncomfortable at first. I didn't think of myself as a hero, and talking about that day in the minefield brought back memories I'd rather leave buried. But the more I spoke, the more I realized how much it mattered. People needed to hear that PTSD didn't make you weak. That seeking help wasn't a failure. That survival, in whatever form it took, was enough. One of the soldiers I'd saved, Sergeant Kyle Brennan, reached out to meet in person. We grabbed coffee at a diner near his home, and he brought his wife and 2 young daughters. The girls were shy, hiding behind their mother's legs, but Kyle's wife hugged me like I was family. "You gave us this," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "All of this. I don't know how to thank you." "You don't have to," I said. But she did anyway. She told me about the life they'd built, about Kyle's work as a teacher, about their plans for the future. She told me that her daughters knew my name, that Kyle talked about me like I was a guardian angel. I didn't feel like a guardian angel. I felt like someone who'd done what needed to be done, who'd made a choice in a moment of chaos. But seeing Kyle with his family, seeing the life he'd built, made it real in a way it hadn't been before. I'd saved him. And in doing so, I'd saved all of this. As for my family, they continued their slow attempts at reconciliation. My mother invited me to Thanksgiving, and I went, cautiously. The atmosphere was different, quieter, more respectful. Mark didn't make jokes at my expense. My mother didn't brush off my experiences. They asked careful questions, listened when I spoke, treated me like my presence mattered. It wasn't perfect. There were moments of awkwardness, silences where the old patterns threatened to resurface. But they caught themselves. They tried. After dinner, my mother pulled me aside. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said. About respect. Okay. I want you to know that I see you now. Really see you. And I'm sorry it took so long." I nodded. "I appreciate that. Is there a chance we can rebuild this?" she asked. "I know I don't deserve it, but we'll see," I said. "It's going to take time." "I understand." And maybe she did. Or maybe she didn't, and she was just saying what she thought I wanted to hear. Either way, I wasn't in a hurry. I'd spent too long giving them the benefit of the doubt, sacrificing my own well-being for the sake of keeping the peace. If we rebuilt our relationship, it would be on my terms, at my pace. Mark caught me before I left. "Thanks for coming." "It was fine. Better than fine, I hope." I smiled, just a little. "Better than last time, at least." He laughed, a genuine sound. "Yeah, better than last time." I drove home that night feeling something I hadn't felt in years, hope. Not that everything would magically be fixed, but that maybe, just maybe, things could be different. That my family could learn to respect me, to see me as more than the sum of my struggles. But even if they didn't, I knew I'd be okay. I'd built a life beyond their approval, found strength in places they'd never touched. I had people who understood me, who valued me, who didn't need proof to believe my pain was real. I didn't need their validation anymore. But I was willing to give them the chance to earn their way back into my life. A year after the documentary aired, I was invited to speak at a military appreciation event in Washington, D.C. It was a formal affair, politicians, high-ranking officers, veterans from multiple generations. I almost declined. Public speaking still made me uncomfortable, and the formality of it felt overwhelming. But Daniel convinced me to go. "You have something worth saying," he told me. "And people need to hear it." So I went. I wrote my speech carefully, trying to find the balance between honoring my service and being honest about its cost. I wanted to talk about PTSD, about the difficulty of coming home, about the importance of supporting veterans beyond just thanking them for their service. The night of the event, I stood backstage in my dress uniform, my hands shaking slightly. I could hear the murmur of the crowd, hundreds of people waiting to hear from speakers they probably found more impressive than me. A general, a senator, a Medal of Honor recipient, and then me, a captain who'd done her job and somehow ended up on the news. When my name was called, I walked out to polite applause. The podium felt like a barrier between me and an ocean of faces. I gripped its edges, took a breath, and began. "I didn't think of myself as a hero that day in the minefield," I said. "I thought of myself as a soldier doing what soldiers do, taking care of the people beside me. But when I came home, I found that heroism was easier for people to accept than humanity." I talked about the disconnect between how people viewed military service and what it actually entailed. The sacrifices, yes, but also the struggles. The pride, but also the pain. I talked about PTSD, about how it wasn't a sign of weakness, but a sign that we'd survived things most people couldn't imagine. For a long time, the people closest to me didn't understand that, I said. They saw my trauma as something I should be able to overcome through willpower alone. They didn't see the reality of what I'd been through because I couldn't make them see it. And I spent years trying to earn their respect, trying to prove I wasn't broken. But I was broken. We all are, in different ways. The question isn't whether we're damaged, it's whether we're willing to do the work to heal. I saw people nodding. Some were wiping their eyes. I'm sharing this because I want other veterans to know they're not alone. If your family doesn't understand, if your friends can't relate, if the people you thought would support you end up dismissing your pain, that's not a reflection of you. That's a reflection of them. Your trauma is real. Your struggle is valid. And you deserve support, not judgment. The applause when I finished was thunderous. People stood. I felt overwhelmed, exposed, but also relieved. I'd said what I needed to say. Afterward, veterans lined up to talk to me. They shared their stories, their struggles, their gratitude that someone had put words to what they'd been feeling. One older man, a Vietnam veteran, shook my hand with tears in his eyes. "I've been waiting 40 years for someone to say that," he told me. "Thank you." I didn't know what to say except, "Thank you for your service." He smiled. "Thank you for yours." My mother called the next day. She'd watched the speech online. "That was beautiful," she said. "Thanks." "I didn't realize." She paused. "I didn't realize how much we hurt you." "I know. I wish I could go back and do it differently." "You can't," I said. "But you can do better now." "I'm trying." And I believed her. Not because she'd suddenly become perfect, but because I'd seen the effort. The small changes, the careful questions, the way she caught herself when old patterns emerged. It wasn't enough to erase the past, but it was something. Mark sent me a text later that week. "Saw your speech. I'm proud of you. I should have been proud of you all along." I didn't respond immediately. I let the message sit, considering whether I wanted to engage. Finally, I wrote back. "Thanks." It wasn't much, but it was honest. I was still figuring out what our relationship would look like, if it would exist at all beyond these tentative exchanges. But I wasn't closing the door completely. I was just being careful about who I let through it. 2 years after the documentary, I received orders for a new assignment, a teaching position at a military academy. It was a significant step in my career, an opportunity to shape the next generation of soldiers. I accepted it eagerly. Before I left, I organized one last meeting of our veteran support group. We'd grown over the years. What started as a handful of people in a community center basement had become a thriving network of veterans supporting each other through the difficulties of post-military life. Daniel and I stood in front of the group, and I felt a lump in my throat as I looked at the faces I'd come to know so well. Casey, the young Marine who'd been so defensive at her first meeting, now helped facilitate discussions. Kyle Brennan, the soldier I'd pulled from the minefield, had become a regular attendee, often bringing other veterans he'd met. There were dozens of others, each with their own story, their own struggle, their own journey toward healing. This group saved my life, I told them. Not in the dramatic way people think about saving lives, but in the everyday way. By showing up. By listening. By reminding me I wasn't alone. I'm leaving for a new assignment, but this group will continue. Daniel will keep it going, and I hope you'll all keep showing up for each other. There were hugs, tears, promises to stay in touch. Daniel pulled me aside before I left. You did good here, he said. We did good, I corrected. He smiled. Yeah, we did. My mother and Mark helped me pack for the move. It was strange, having them in my space, touching my things, being part of this transition. But it was also nice. They asked where things should go, made jokes that weren't at my expense, treated me like someone whose opinions mattered. You nervous? Mark asked as we loaded boxes into the truck. A little. You'll do great. You always do. I looked at him, searching for sarcasm, but found none. He meant it. Thanks. My mother made dinner that night, lasagna, my favorite. We ate together at my small kitchen table, the conversation flowing more easily than it had in years. She asked about my new position, about what I'd be teaching, about my plans for the future. Mark talked about his job, about Ashley, about their plans to get married. You'll come to the wedding, right? He asked. When is it? Next spring. We're still figuring out the details, but we want you there. I nodded. I'll be there. It felt surreal, this normalcy. There were still scars, still moments when I remembered the mockery, the humiliation, the years of feeling unseen. But there was also this, shared meals, genuine conversation, the slow rebuilding of something that had been broken. Before I left town, my mother asked if we could talk privately. We sat on my empty living room floor, the apartment echoing with absence. I want to make sure you know, she said, that I understand what I did wrong. Not just at that dinner, but for years before. I dismissed your pain because I didn't know how to handle it. I thought being tough meant not acknowledging struggle. But I was wrong. I know, I said. And I want you to know that I'm proud of you. Not because of the documentary or the medal or any of that. I'm proud of you because you survived something terrible and you're still here, still fighting, still helping other people. That takes more strength than I ever gave you credit for. Her words settled over me, heavy and meaningful. I'd waited years to hear something like this. It didn't erase the hurt, but it acknowledged it. And that mattered. Thank you, I said. I love you, Michaela. I should have said that more. I love you too. We hugged, and it felt different than the obligatory embraces of the past. It felt real. The teaching position was everything I'd hoped for and more. I worked with cadets who reminded me of my younger self, eager, uncertain, full of potential. I taught them about leadership, about decision-making under pressure, about the realities of combat that no classroom could fully prepare them for. I was honest with them in ways my instructors hadn't been with me. I talked about PTSD, about the difficulty of coming home, about the importance of taking care of themselves and their soldiers. Some of them looked uncomfortable when I brought up mental health, but most listened intently. One cadet approached me after class. Ma'am, can I ask you something? Of course. How do you deal with it? The PTSD, I mean. My dad was in Iraq and he struggles. I don't know how to help him. I thought carefully about my answer. You help him by not treating him like he's broken. By respecting his experience without trying to fix it. By just being there. That's it. That's a lot, I said. More than you might think. He nodded slowly. Thanks, ma'am. I watched him leave, hoping I'd given him something useful. These conversations happened more often than I'd expected. Cadets with family members who'd served, cadets worried about their own futures, cadets trying to understand what they were signing up for. I tried to be honest without being discouraging, to prepare them without scaring them. My work was fulfilling in a way combat never had been. I was still serving, still making a difference, but without the constant threat of death. I could sleep through the night more often than not. The nightmares still came, but less frequently. I was healing slowly but surely. My family visited during the holidays. Mark and Ashley came together, engaged now, planning a future I'd once doubted he was capable of. My mother seemed lighter somehow, less burdened by the stoicism she'd worn like armor for so long. We went to dinner at a restaurant near the academy. The conversation was easy, punctuated by laughter that felt genuine. Mark told stories about his job that were actually funny. My mother asked thoughtful questions about my cadets. Ashley fit in seamlessly, her warmth filling gaps I hadn't known existed. At one point, Mark raised his glass. To Michaela. For putting up with us, even though we didn't deserve it. Mark, my mother started. No, I mean it. We screwed up. We know that. But you gave us another chance, and we're grateful. I felt my throat tighten. You're doing better. That's what matters. We're trying, he said. We clinked glasses, and I felt something shift inside me. Not forgiveness, exactly, that was still a work in progress. But acceptance. Acceptance that people could change, that relationships could be repaired, that the past didn't have to dictate the future. Later, my mother and I walked through the campus. It was cold, the kind of crisp winter evening where your breath fogs in front of you. She linked her arm through mine. Are you happy? She asked. Yeah, I said. I think I am. Good. You deserve to be. We walked in comfortable silence, the weight of years of misunderstanding finally beginning to lift. Mark and Ashley's wedding was in a small chapel surrounded by spring flowers. I stood beside Ashley as one of her bridesmaids, wearing a dress I'd picked out with my mother. It was strange, being part of the celebration, this moment of joy in a family that had once felt so fractured. Mark looked nervous as he stood at the altar, his hands clasped in front of him. When Ashley walked down the aisle, his face transformed. I'd never seen my brother look at anyone with that much tenderness. During the reception, Mark pulled me aside. Thanks for being here. Of course. I know things were bad for a while. And I know I was a big part of that. Mark, you don't have to, I do, he said. Because I need you to know that I'm not that person anymore. Or I'm trying not to be. You deserved better from me, and I'm sorry I didn't give it to you. I felt tears prick my eyes. I appreciate that. You're my sister. And I'm proud of who you are. I should have said that years ago. You're saying it now. That counts. He hugged me, and I hugged him back, feeling the weight of our shared history, the good and the bad, settle into something manageable. My mother gave a speech during the reception. She talked about watching her children grow up, about the challenges and joys of parenthood, about learning to let go while still being present. Then she looked directly at me. I want to take a moment to acknowledge my daughter, Michaela. She's taught me more about strength and resilience than anyone I've ever known. I wasn't always the mother she deserved, but she gave me the chance to be better. And for that, I'm grateful. The room applauded. I felt exposed, vulnerable, but also seen in a way I hadn't been before. After the wedding, I returned to my life at the academy. The cadets kept me busy, kept me grounded. I continued therapy, continued working on myself, continued building a life that felt authentic and meaningful. The relationship with my family remained measured. We talked regularly, visited when we could, but there was an understanding that boundaries mattered. That respect was non-negotiable. They'd learned, and I'd learned, and we were all better for it. One afternoon, I received an email from Casey, the young Marine from the support group. She'd been accepted to officer candidate school and wanted to thank me for encouraging her to apply. You showed me that surviving isn't the same as thriving, she wrote. And that we get to choose which one we're going to do. I'm choosing to thrive. Thank you for showing me how. I read the email 3 times, my chest tight with emotion. This was why I served. Not for medals or recognition or even for my family's approval. For moments like this. For the chance to help someone else find their way. 5 years after the documentary aired, I was promoted to major. The ceremony was small, held on the academy grounds, attended by colleagues and cadets. My mother and Mark were there, sitting in the front row. Daniel flew in from across the country. Kyle Brennan came with his family. As the commanding officer pinned the new rank on my uniform, I felt a sense of completion. Not because I'd reached some arbitrary milestone, but because I'd built a life on my own terms. A life defined by service, by connection, by the courage to set boundaries and demand respect. After the ceremony, Kyle approached me with his daughters. They were older now, less shy, full of energy and curiosity. "Girls, this is Major Rockford," he said. "The woman I told you about." The older daughter looked up at me. "You saved my dad." "I did," I said. "Thank you," she said seriously. I crouched down to her level. "You're welcome. Take good care of him, okay?" She nodded solemnly. My mother hugged me after the ceremony. "Your father would have been proud." It was the first time she'd mentioned him in years. I felt the old ache of his absence, but it was softer now, tempered by time. "I hope so," I said. "I know so." That evening, my family and friends gathered for a small celebration. We shared food and stories, laughter echoing through the room. Mark gave a toast, his voice steady and sincere. To my sister, who's always been stronger than the rest of us combined. Who taught us what real courage looks like, even when we were too stubborn to see it. I raised my glass, surrounded by people who understood me, who valued me, who'd earned their place in my life. This was what I'd fought for. Not recognition or validation from people who'd hurt me, but the freedom to build a life filled with genuine respect and connection. The documentary had forced my family to confront the truth of my service, but the real victory wasn't their acknowledgement. It was the life I'd built in spite of their dismissal. I thought about the girl I'd been, desperate for her family's approval, willing to sacrifice her own well-being for the sake of keeping the peace. She'd been brave too, in her own way. But she'd been brave in service of people who didn't appreciate it. Now I was brave for myself. For the cadets I taught, the veterans I supported, the soldiers I'd served with. I was brave because I'd learned that respect couldn't be demanded or earned through suffering. It could only be given freely or not at all. My family had chosen, finally, to give it. And I'd chosen to let them back in, carefully, on my own terms. But even if they hadn't, even if they'd remained locked in their dismissiveness and mockery, I would have been okay. Because I'd learned the most important lesson of all: my worth wasn't determined by their perception of me. It never had been. The footage on the news hadn't revealed what I'd done to them. It had revealed it to the world. But I'd always known. The soldiers I'd served with had always known. And in the end, that was enough. I looked around the room at the faces of people I loved and respected, people who'd earned their place through actions, not obligation. Daniel caught my eye and raised his glass in a silent toast. I raised mine back. This was my life. Hard won, carefully built, fiercely protected. And it was mine. They'd called me pathetic. They'd laughed. They'd dismissed my trauma as weakness. But the truth had come out not in words, but in actions. And once it did, there was no laughter left. Only respect. Only silence. Only the acknowledgement that some wounds run deeper than mockery can reach, and some strength is forged in fires that comfortable people will never understand. I didn't need their validation anymore. But I'd let them be part of my life anyway, because I'd learned that forgiveness wasn't about them, it was about me. About choosing to release the weight of their judgment and walk forward unburdened. They'd see me now, finally, for who I really was. And I'd see them too, flawed, human, capable of growth. It wasn't a perfect ending. But it was real. And real was enough. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, forwarded from the Pentagon to my office at the Academy. I recognized the seal immediately: Department of Defense, official correspondence. My hands were steady as I opened it, but my heart wasn't. Inside was a notification. I'd been selected to receive the Soldier's Medal, the Army's highest award for heroism not involving actual conflict with an enemy. The ceremony would be held in 6 weeks at the Pentagon. I could bring guests. I set the letter down on my desk and stared at it for a long moment. Another medal. Another recognition of that day in the minefield. I should have felt proud, honored. Instead, I felt tired. Daniel called that evening. Somehow he'd already heard. You going to the ceremony? He asked. I don't know. You should. You earned it. I know. I paused, trying to find the words. I don't want to be defined by one day for the rest of my life. You're not, he said. But that day matters. What you did matters. Let them honor it. I thought about his words after we hung up. He was right, of course. That day did matter. The soldiers I'd saved mattered. The example it set for others mattered. My discomfort with recognition didn't change any of that. I called my mother the next day. There's a ceremony, I said. At the Pentagon. They're giving me the Soldier's Medal. She was quiet for a moment. That's incredible, Michaela. You can come if you want. You and Mark. We'll be there, she said immediately. Both of us. The 6 weeks passed quickly. I prepared my cadets for their final exams, wrote evaluations, met with struggling students who reminded me of myself at their age. The academy had become home in a way I hadn't expected. These young people, with their earnest questions and their fears about the future, gave me purpose beyond my own healing. One cadet, a quiet young woman named Rodriguez, stayed after class one afternoon. She'd been struggling all semester, not with the material but with confidence. Ma'am, can I ask you something personal? Go ahead. Were you ever scared you weren't good enough? I smiled. Every day. She looked surprised. Really? But you've done so much. Doing things doesn't mean you're not afraid. It just means you do them anyway. Even now. Especially now, I said. The more responsibility you have, the more aware you become of everything that could go wrong. But you learn to trust your training, your instincts, your team. And you learn that being scared doesn't make you weak, it makes you human. She nodded slowly. Thank you, ma'am. After she left, I sat in my empty classroom and thought about fear. About how it had shaped me, driven me, nearly destroyed me. About how I'd finally learned to acknowledge it without letting it control me. The night before the ceremony, I couldn't sleep. I lay in my hotel room in Washington, staring at the ceiling, thinking about the path that had brought me here. The girl I'd been, desperate for approval. The soldier I'd become, fighting for something bigger than myself. The woman I was now, still fighting, but for different things. My phone buzzed. A text from Mark. Landed safe. See you tomorrow. Proud of you, sis. Another from my mother. Can't wait to see you receive this honor. You deserve it. One from Daniel. Remember, you're not defined by one day. You're defined by every day you choose to show up. I fell asleep holding my phone, surrounded by words that once would have felt impossible. The ceremony was formal, held in a grand hall with flags and photographs of soldiers who'd served with distinction. I stood in my dress uniform, surrounded by other recipients and their families. My mother and Mark sat in the third row. Daniel had positioned himself near the back, giving me a thumbs up when I caught his eye. The citations were read aloud, each one detailing acts of courage, sacrifice, moments when ordinary people did extraordinary things. When my name was called, I walked to the front, my steps measured and sure. The general who pinned the medal to my uniform looked me in the eye. Your actions that day saved lives and exemplified the finest traditions of military service. Thank you, Major Rockford. Thank you, sir. The applause felt distant, like it was happening to someone else. I returned to my place, the weight of the medal somehow both significant and meaningless. It didn't change what had happened. It didn't erase the nightmares or make my family's past dismissal hurt less. But it acknowledged, publicly and permanently, that what I'd done mattered. After the ceremony, my mother approached me. Her eyes were wet. I wish your father could have seen this, she said. Me too. He would have been so proud. I am so proud. I hugged her, feeling the complicated mix of gratitude and old hurt that still existed between us. We'd come far, but some wounds took longer to heal than others. Mark shook my hand, then pulled me into a hug. You're incredible, you know that? I'm just a soldier who did her job. No, he said firmly. You're a soldier who went above and beyond, multiple times, and we're lucky you're our sister. Later, at dinner with my family and Daniel, the conversation flowed easily. We talked about the ceremony, about Mark and Ashley's plans to buy a house, about my mother's new hobby of painting. Normal things, family things, the kind of moments I'd once thought we'd never have. Daniel raised his glass. To Michaela, who taught us all what it means to be brave. To Michaela, they echoed. I looked around the table at these people, family by blood and by choice, and felt something close to peace. The journey hadn't been easy. There had been pain, betrayal, years of feeling invisible. But we'd made it here, to this moment, where respect was given freely and love wasn't conditional on silence. My phone buzzed. An email from Casey. She'd just graduated from officer candidate school and wanted me to know I'd be invited to her commissioning ceremony. You changed my life, ma'am, she wrote. I hope I can do the same for others. I showed the email to Daniel. He smiled. See? That's your real legacy. Not the medals. The people you've helped along the way. He was right. The soldier's medal would hang on my wall alongside my other commendations, a reminder of one day when everything had hung in the balance. But my real legacy was measured in moments like this: cadets finding their confidence, veterans finding their strength, a family learning to choose respect over mockery. We finished dinner and walked out into the cool Washington evening. My mother linked her arm through mine, just like she had that night at the academy. I'm grateful you gave us another chance, she said quietly. I'm grateful you took it seriously. We won't let you down again. I wanted to believe her completely, without reservation. Part of me did. But another part, the part that had been hurt too deeply, remained cautious. And that was okay. Trust rebuilt slowly, earned through consistent action, not promises. As we said our goodbyes, Mark pulled me aside one last time. I know we can't undo the past, he said. But I want you to know I see you now. Really see you. And I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure you know you matter. Okay, I said simply. Because that was all I'd ever wanted. To be seen, to be valued, to matter to the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. I flew back to the academy the next morning, the soldier's medal carefully packed in my carry-on. When I returned to my office, I hung it on the wall next to a photograph of my unit, the men and women I'd served with, the ones who'd understood me when no one else could. A cadet knocked on my door. Ma'am? Do you have a minute? Of course. Come in. And life continued, as it always did. One moment at a time, one choice at a time, building something lasting from the pieces of what had been broken. They'd called me pathetic once. They'd laughed at my pain. But I'd survived. I'd healed. And I'd built a life that honored both my service and my humanity. That was victory enough. That's my story. Your turn. Have you ever been mocked for something real you were battling? PTSD, anxiety, grief? What boundary did you set, and did it change anything? If an apology came late, would you accept it or keep your distance? Drop your experience in the comments so others know they're not alone. If this resonated, like the video, subscribe for more true stories, and share this with someone who needs backup today.